The scripture lesson today is going to come out of the book of Acts. It'll be from the 16th chapter. It's at a place where Paul is trying to decide where to go to minister. He tries to go north and he's blocked. He tries to go west and he's blocked. And then we're told this from the scriptures. That night, Paul had a dream. A Macedonian stood on the far shore and called across the sea, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." The dream gave Paul his map. He went to work at once, getting things ready to cross over to Macedonia. All the pieces had come together. This is the word of God.
So we're shifting this conversation from identity, which we've been talking about the last several weeks. We said the story of the Hebrew people, which is the story that Jesus comes from, and then Jesus coming from that story is sort of the grounding story for the Christian tradition. That identity is a huge part of that, but that identity is discovered in transition. Identity is discovered wandering in the wilderness. Identity is discovered failing and asking questions and listening for where to go next. And so the story kind of picks up with these guys that are moving all around. They're trying to, and I love that it's initially in the text, it's not the enemy that's blocking them, it's the Spirit. Mm-hmm. Right? What do you guys hear in that? Have you ever heard this story, first of all? Anybody ever heard this story? What does that make you feel? Like they have an idea of where they want to go, but the Spirit blocks them. What do you guys... You can be honest. You can go, that's weird. Never heard, why would the Spirit block them, right? Aren't they trying to do the right thing? Any thoughts? So I want to give you the punchline, and then Ron and I are going to kind of come back, and we'll back into the sermon, and then we're going to end with the table. If we do the sermon right, then all of us, plus maybe we each bring a few friends, end up Friday night, weather permitting, at First Fridays over on Beach Street. And the hope is that our worshiping community will eventually be over on Beach Street, more on that plan. But we want to go begin to engage and listen to our neighborhood, right? Jesus says radical things like love your neighbor. And we tend, in modern Christianity, very isolated as we are from everyone and everything, we think that's like a theoretical idea, like, oh, love your neighbor. But we actually live in a neighborhood. So it's really like more like love your neighborhood. So we're going to go listen to our neighborhood. That's where we want to be. Friday, 6 p.m., downtown, Beach Street, First Friday. We've invited folks to wear purple so we can find each other. And then if people ask you, like, why are you wearing purple? Just be normal. Don't be weird. Just say, I'm here with my church. We're thinking about moving over here. If they don't ask you anything religious, don't tell them anything. Like, just be normal. Just be normal. But yeah, you want to go listen. And here's the deal. Be curious. Be curious. Ask way more questions than you do talk about yourself or the church or anything else. Ask good questions. Be curious about your neighborhood. So that's the punchline. If the sermon works, we all end up over there. Ron.
Just to jump on that, Debbie was at the dentist, which happens to be on Beach Street. We were down there this last week, and so I thought I'd take a early stroll around.
Yeah.
And I walked down, and there's a cigar store right there that a fellow, his name is Miguel, runs it. Very nice man. And he was there with a police officer and two other people, and they were talking about the problem they have with homelessness and with homeless people.
Yeah.
And the way in which they don't agree with their lifestyle and the way and the choices they make. And I found that very interesting, that it was not only coming from a store owner, but also from the police that were there, trying to figure out, like we are, how can we best serve people? And that was an interesting thing. So,
and it's I love what you identified, which is there is the truth of the store owner, the truth of the police, and the truth of this individual who is experiencing homelessness. But then there's the stories each of those groups have chosen to tell about each other.
Yeah.
And so, what might it mean for us to be a church in that sort of downtown Daytona on Beach Street who, if we're not doing it, we're not saying we're going to fix homelessness. What if we just started helping people to tell better stories about people experiencing homelessness? What if we started telling better stories about the relationships between the police and people experiencing homelessness? Not because we were standing outside and going, somebody should address that, but because we were downtown. Maybe we actually had relationships with the police and people experiencing homelessness, right? Not we're standing outside and going, somebody ought to do something. But if, and again, if, I'm not saying that's the answer, right?
Right.
That's what Debbie heard. That's what Ron heard, because they're listening. But we all need to go and listen and ask that question. Who is it? You know, and again, I love this. It doesn't say Paul and Barnabas went to a church service and the pastor got up and said, go to Macedonia, right? Where does it come from? A dream? How do we fact check that? I can't fact check that in the Bible.
Okay.
But if you've got a dream and you've got a calling, apparently, that's how God shows us who to go to, right? So let's start where the text starts. What are the obstacles? Yeah. What are the potential obstacles that might block our attempt to say good news to our neighborhood? Fear of rejection. Absolutely. Right? And that's one of the things I think when it comes to like church and sharing faith and stuff like that, sort of the assumption that because we have good news that eliminates the fear of rejection. No, fear of rejection is like a horrendous emotional experience. No matter, like, even if you believe in God, that doesn't change it. Being rejected is awful. That's painful. That's hard stuff. And you'll be okay. You know? Because, go ahead. Yeah. Mm. So Debbie's saying, so very often we're trying to address a real problem like homelessness, but we'll come and attack them with the Bible. And I think that's, maybe that's residual from like colonial Christianity, which is like rather than solving the problem people have, it's like let's assimilate them first, and then they won't have the problem because they'll just be like us. Right? We've kind of proven now that doesn't work. A couple thousand years under our belt of that failing, that doesn't work. So what does work? What in these smaller communities who can actually listen to each other, look each other in the eye, solve problems together? What are obstacles that we see as an attempt to reach people? I mean, I think this is a great one. We have inherited structures. So one of the obstacles to reaching people, let's say we feel called to reach people, to serve those who are homeless. One of those obstacles is going to probably be the relationship with the police. Another obstacle is probably going to be store owners. By obstacle, we need to be very careful not to say enemy, right? I'm reading a book right now that's like basically retracing all of Stoic philosophy, which is fantastic. But the name of the book is The Obstacle is the Way. Right? What if the solution to homelessness in Daytona Beach is store owners and police? But we've been taught to come at it as if those are the enemies. Guys, I promise you, the solution to that problem must include store owners and the police. The obstacle is the way. So let's listen. What are the obstacles people are facing, and how can we be a part of the solution? Or again, we don't need to come in and be Christian saviors.
Right.
How can we just listen? Maybe that's the healing, is just to listen to people who are hurting. Maybe the good news is simply it's not your fault, right? Like, I wish I could solve your homelessness. I can't. But God's not mad at you. This is not your fault. You're not being punished for something you've done. Do people disagree with your choices? Sure. Does God love you any less? Absolutely not. So what other obstacles, Nancy? Yeah. All right, I'm going to do something. This is crazy. People don't do this in church anymore. How many of you guys will admit to knowing what Nancy's talking about? How many of you would say you have been led by the Spirit before? You've experienced feeling led by the Spirit? Oh, you guys are it. This is the real deal. Ooh, a bunch of mystics. Okay. Yeah, Nancy's on it. We have to listen for the Spirit. Yeah. We have to get out of our own way. Yeah. We raised hands, we'd all know what that is too. We have to get out of our own way. Okay, so I want to encourage you, one of the things that this author in the book, I can't remember his name or I would say it, The Obstacle is the Way, I'll tell you next week. One of the things he says is part of the way you overcome obstacles is you visualize the obstacles in advance and you realize that there are a number of different ways to overcome it. You don't wait till that moment so that you get paralyzed. You go, I could think about how this could go, and then I could kind of work around it. So even if you can't think of it now, part of the practice I invite you to take with you this week is to be kind of thinking about what are some of the obstacles that might come up as I'm trying to listen to and serve my neighborhood. Joe. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. What a great, thank you. That's so honest. So the lack of resources creates this burden where if we go out and listen to all this need and we realistically can't solve it, then, we just carry that guilt of not having the ability to solve it. That's a great question. And I think I don't know the answer, right? I know that's not popular for a pastor. I don't know. That's really tough. I think part of that is that we carry it together. And I think a good example of that was with Rakisha. Yeah, that we continued to kind of name the need, share the need. And yeah, when that gets bigger than this congregation, I don't know, but I know that we carry it together. And I think that's what we've got to do. And I think as you come, I don't know if this is historically true. I've heard this in seminaries and whatever, that in the early church, before they would break the bread, they would go around and ask if there was anyone in need, right? Did someone need some extra money to pay bills? Was there someone who had a physical need, whatever? And before they would take communion, they would make sure everyone's basic needs were met, right, for the coming week. How do we begin to carry that sensibility into, these conversations so that it's not as overwhelming? How do I solve this? But are there people in my life, and Joe had a friend in need this week, and someone that probably wouldn't usually ask for help, but ended up being able to help. And I think it's, like Nancy said, the openness to the Spirit leading, also the openness to the neighbor leading. We can't solve everything, but if you're listening, the neighbor in need will arise, I believe. I know that didn't answer your question. I don't know how to get over the guilt part. That's hard. One more hand, and then we got to move on. Helen. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think. Yeah, so Helen said, take for example politics, but we live in a culture that separates us. We've been talking about that. We sort of, individualism has succeeded. We're very divided, and we've got not just division, but animosity. So yeah, I mean, that's forget about Beach Street. How do we just approach the neighbor with the major divides? I think, again, it's about the story we tell. I think we turn off the news. I think we stop believing that story that we're divided. And that has to begin with humanizing, because what you're saying, the bumper stickers are a great example, because a bumper sticker is a caricature, right? That's an easy way to put somebody in a category, but they're not a category. They're a person. And every bumper sticker on every car and every violent expression is an expression of pain, right? Wherever they've come from, that seems like a solution to their problem. So the response is not to get rid of them because they're the problem, but to ask, where does that pain come from? What kind of pain have you experienced that seems like the solution to it? That's what Jesus is interested in. That's what we're interested in, right? Not making them the villain, but asking, where's your pain? Can that pain be healed, right? And if we can do that in a community, then maybe there's hope. So what are the dreams? What time is it? My goodness.
Yeah.
What are the dreams you guys have, literal or figurative, for this community, right? We're a few months from being out of this building after 70 years, 100 years total as a congregation. What are the dreams we have for this congregation? The dream of a future, yeah.
Debbie and I came into this church just recently. We were fortunate to find you. One of my dreams is that others find this kind of community that accepts and is open to everybody and everything and doesn't do what Helen said. We're not political, we're not here to judge anybody's ways of doing anything. We're here to love each other. And that's why we keep coming back. This is a community of love, and I'm really excited about the opportunity to go out there and express that, but also know the difficulty of how do you really do that? How do you let another person know you're going to love them unconditionally that you don't know, that you're, and that sense of acceptance that is here, I think will help us in that. It'll help us to branch out and find those folks who are looking.
What a good point, just how hard a sell that is in this world. Like most of the people we're talking to don't believe they're unconditionally loved by the people in their family, by their primary caregiver, by the people that raised them, by the friend group they've grown up with. Unless they're very lucky, they probably don't have more than a person or two. They really believe that, and you're going to come to them as a stranger and be like, "We love you unconditionally." By the way, we're saying that on behalf of the church, who has not kept those promises, in the past. So there's a lot of obstacles to overcome. But again, what someone cannot refute, we're not talking theology, church history, do you agree or disagree? They can't disagree with you being curious about them, right? You wanting to know someone is not a religious disagreement. Kindness is not a religious disagreement. Compassion. So humanize first. And I guarantee, especially if there's something that's super off-putting about that person, odds are that's a reflection of something going on in you, which is another invitation to practice your spirituality not as a lens, right, but as a mirror. You're not looking at them in this other person that makes you so uncomfortable. You're looking at yourself, right? Where's that inner growth need to happen so that you can see them as a person rather than as a caricature? So what a beautiful dream. That other people find this, because it's crazy to be 20 years in and feel like probably now more than ever I believe in this. I feel like this is something people need so much, the ability to be honest and pray together and struggle. Any other obstacles, dreams? Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's part of that. We spent 12 months in the sort of recovery steps, and that's a big part of recovery community is attraction, not promotion. And I used to say this, the congregation that I led before this, we would sit in silence for about 3 or 4 minutes in each service. And I always had this dream, this vision of what if silence is not just something that we experience or we create, but what if it's like a proactive force? We sit in silence, and then that silence gets out of the building and down onto Beach Street. And I think that way about the community of love and practice, that I think if we're just doing our thing and we're open to other people finding what we're doing, it doesn't require the marketing that always feels like it's too good to be true. And there's not a good way to do religious marketing, so let's just be a spiritual community and let the people find it, because otherwise it feels like you're pushing it.
An organization I grew up with, always had the slogan, you had to earn the right to be heard.
Yeah.
Especially when it came to speaking about religious things. And the whole idea that we have to invest in these people in order to let them hear the words that we have for them that we think are life, and we want to share that. But and I think that comes just through interaction. There is no method. It's be there, listen, have open ears, have an open heart, to whatever's going on. Yeah, that's right.
There's a Bible here, right? So this is somewhere. We've got to have one. There's got to be a Bible in here somewhere. This changed about, not the Bible. The location of authority changed over the last 30 years. And for a long time, you could just stand up and say, credibility, authority, I've got good news for you. Why? Because I've got the book that God said it in, right? And for until Google, everyone was like, fine, good. that makes sense. I can't speak Greek. I don't speak Hebrew. But then once the world got smaller, it stopped being about authority and credibility in a book, and it started being about authority and credibility in trust. And the only way you can earn trust is to build trust. You don't get to carry a Bible down Beach Street and tell people good news. They don't care. They just don't care. Mm-hmm. Do they trust you, right? When you say, we won't judge you, right? Just come hear good news for an hour on Sunday. Nobody's going to judge you. Promise. Did they trust you? At the end of the day, that's really the only question that matters if we're trying to share this. Can you earn credibility and trust? Okay. Last one, and you're going to do more thinking on this because we've got to get to the table. Yeah. How do we discern? This is back to where the passage started. How do we discern where we want to go versus where the Spirit is calling us to go? How do we discern if it's just our desire, right? Because I want to go minister in Fiji, actually. The surf season is very good right now, and they need the Lord, right? How do we know if it's that or where God's shutting down our selfish desire so that we might go somewhere else, Tara? Because it will fall into place. We've experienced that in the last 18 months here. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and it's part of the way we know is because we see in hindsight that we didn't make it happen. The way it happens is beyond anyone's ability to manipulate, so we look back and we go, ooh, we thought we were done, and look how that panned out.
And I think in the scripture, Paul's example is a great one because twice he's blocked by the Spirit, and then out of nowhere comes a message to him of where he's supposed to go. Yeah. And I think sometimes, as long as we're open, as Paul was open, who knows,
Yep.
Where God's going to lead us and how he's going to tell us to get there.
Ooh, I didn't even write this. This is just a free one. It's not God who tells him. God sends a person, right? Where God's going to call us is like, even if it's in a dream, it's not God going, go to Macedonia, right? God sends a person who says, please come and help me. Yeah. Please come and say good news to me. So yes, pray about it. Yes, be open to it. But if there's somebody asking you for help, stop waiting for God to tell you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it makes me think about sometimes we try to force our help on people who aren't really asking for our help, rather than look for or be attentive to the ones who really want our help. We target certain groups, certain people, certain whatever, and we don't listen to the ones that are right there.
Like Debbie said, I'm really hungry. Well, let's do a Bible study. Okay, maybe you didn't hear me. I'm really hungry. We take this thing that no one's asking for. Here, let me give you this. It's like, that's not what I'm asking for. Yeah, so we got to go and listen. So what's the homework? Friday night, 6 p.m., Friday night, 6 p.m., yes. Any questions about that logistically? You all have been to Beach Street. We're going to meet at 6 p.m., like down on the south side, in front of Cinematique Theater, so down on that south side. Come on around. Don't schedule it so that you park at 6. Park at like 5:45 because you'll have time to walk around. We'll all kind of meet up. And then we'll get together and then kind of go out. You all can get food, go meet each other. Let's come to the table together. Thank you guys so much for the trust here, for modeling this kind of vulnerability and engagement. It means a ton to this community and our practice. Thank you.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Lift up your hearts.
We lift them.
Let us give thanks to the Lord our God. It is truly right and our great joy to worship you, eternal God. Again, from the message in the 11th chapter of 1 Corinthians, we hear these words from the Apostle Paul. Let me go over with you again exactly what goes on in the Lord's Supper and why it's so centrally important. I received my instructions from the Master himself, and I pass them on to you. The Master Jesus, on the night of his betrayal, took bread, and having given thanks, he broke it, and he said, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." After supper, he did the same thing with the cup. "This cup is my blood, my new covenant with you. Each time you drink the cup, remember me. We are here this morning remembering Jesus, remembering his love for us, remembering that he gave himself for us, even to the point of death. He said, "This bread represents my body, which is given for you," given to us as Jesus gave himself. This cup, he said, represents the new covenant, the covenant found in my blood and his willingness to even go to death on our behalf. This morning, this table is open to any and everyone who desires to come forth. This is a table not for just certain people who are qualified in certain ways, but for anyone with a heart that is open and desires to receive these elements. So come and enjoy this meal.
I believe that every heart is kind.
This bread represents the body of Christ.
Some are just a little